I think you had one that was
there is extensive which I sent to all the board almost
We're going to reconvene. We're on to discussion item B, board policy 5.11, student admission and administrative regulation, 11.1, residency. Board subcommittee, present your findings and recommendations for board discussion. Ms. Rossiter, Mr. Connie. Julie, can you start us?
Okay, well, just to go over our process a little bit, we met 2 times in person, but also had numerous back and forth, multiple revisions, red lines of the policy to the policy and the reg. I just call it all the policies just to make it easier. With discussion and comment, and sort of try to come as much to an agreement as possible on each of the items that we were talking about. We also had it reviewed by council, which led to further revisions by us, and ultimately came up with this document, this first draft that we're presenting tonight. In my mind, I wrote down that there are basically 4 main points to it, main changes, I guess. One was to provide clarification and notice to the community about what our policy is, what our regs are regarding residency. The other thing that we did is we, after much discussion, ended up maintaining the broad categories of proof of residency that we have in the policy, and in fact we expanded the list to include inclusion of more items. For example, instead of just saying a driver's license, we expanded that to include military ID or other California issued ID that might not be a driver's license if somebody doesn't have that. So we tried to make that more inclusive, and I think we need to talk about that. Grantee that I think we end up not making it here, that we should probably put together, so we can go through that as we go through it a little more carefully. We tried to strengthen the homeless and foster youth provisions, so that is a big change to the policy. And then we modified the revocation of enrollment provision, the procedure. So we added in a review process that gives the student the ability to present new evidence. We added in an appeal process in which the board provides an additional layer of review. We basically shifted the ultimate decision making from the superintendent to the board. So that was an intentional shift on our part. And a lot of our efforts went into, a lot of our focus went into trying to make that process not only fair, but also as streamlined as possible. Because when you start adding in these layers of review, all of a sudden you find out that it's a 6-month process, and we were trying to compress it as much as we could and still keep a fair appeal process in place. So that was sort of, you know, in my mind, our main points for the revision. A couple of things that one thing that I think we still need to talk about with the alternative living arrangements language and what we want to do with that. We had some language in there in the past. Dig it up. Let's see, where is that? It should be. It's on page 128, starting at line 6. We deleted that thinking that it was sort of redundant based on the additional proofs of residency that we included in the policy. But it's something that I just want, as we're discussing it, for you guys to kind of keep in mind to see if you think we actually need to keep that in. You know, I think our proof of residency, the way we drafted it, is broad enough that we wouldn't actually need that, and it doesn't really add anything. In fact, it's kind of vague and confusing. So that's where we're at. Jason, did you want to add anything just on the overarching?
No, I think that was excellent. I want to thank you for this process. It's been great working together on it. You know, writing and going back and forth on one of these things is not easy. I just underscore, I think, the things we do want to focus on and welcome any feedback on. We tried to make things clearer, subheadings, so a parent could pick this up and understand it. I mean, really, it sort of wove its way. One thing we struggled with, and it's here, this is a draft, it's not a proposal for adoption. There's a section under the reasonable inquiry section about, okay, reasonable inquiry has 2 parts. Someone raising the issue at the school, and then the superintendent's duty to follow it. Those are words mimicked in the come from statute. We added something that is not in any policy we could find, some examples of that to try to draw it out. That may work or not work. We felt like that was something that that we wanted some transparency and discussion on, but we're not sure writing it is very helpful, because then you miss things, and then it. So we welcome comments on that. I just want to second the alternative living arrangement comment. We struggled with that. It was in our policy. We don't know why it's in the policy.
We don't know what it means.
We don't know. It's not a term defined by law, and in the modern world, alternative living arrangements, well, we're all alternative. It just doesn't seem to make much sense to us, particularly if we address situations elsewhere. The board process in it, I think Julie already covered that, the right to appeal. Yeah, I think those are the big points.
You know, one thing that I was thinking as I was reading it in this form, which still is a little confusing because you have all the red lines in it, but, and maybe we don't do this, but these subheadings, it would be nice to just have them bolded.
Yeah, I agree with that. We don't do it in other places,
much
but
more
we should.
readable.
Yeah.
So I would like to see, you know, criteria for residency, proof of residency, and, you know, whatever other subheadings bolded, just because I think it will help, you know, make it easier to read. Failure to verify residency, you know, the homeless youth section. So that, I think, is a change that we could make just to make it easier to read. And then, I don't know, did you want to, do you want us to just ask people questions, if board members have questions at this point, and then, you know, because we do have, like, I think I want to discuss on it.
Yeah, I thought we could go through and talk about it.
Then just go through it?
Pages. Yeah.
Sure. I don't know when you wanted to do.
No, let's go through it. See what work.
I have a question. While she's in paragraph 2.
Of the policy.
What page?
Paragraph 2 on page 1.
Of the policy or
There's
the
one
Of the
thing,
policy,
too.
of the policy.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
board, revocation of enrollment and board review of that decision upon appeal of a student may result upon failure to verify residence. You can read it. Anyway, does that mean that if a student appeals, the board will review it? Or would the board review it before the residency is denied?
It means that the person whose residency is denied through the process that existed and now refined has an opportunity to appeal. So the reason for stating this in the board policy is just as a map to say, look at the regulation, you will have an opportunity to appeal.
And then the process is laid out in the regulation. I do think we, instead of appeal of a student, we should say by a student.
Yeah, that's, yes.
See, this is a work in progress.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think
that
by will
sentence
be
has a
more
lot
clear.
going on in it.
Yeah, maybe it can be two sentences. It's trying to say that you have a right of appeal, and what the old policy never said is that revocation may result. I mean, it just didn't say it, so.
I mean, you could just say revocation of enrollment may result upon failure and not have to. I think the point was that you
Yeah.
wanted to show people that there was this right of appeal. Please
Exactly.
look at the-
And that the board would be the final decision maker on that.
So that's the reasoning behind it, so,
Okay.
you know, it might be more clear without that clause, but.
Or two sentences.
Yeah, make it two
Revocation.
sentences.
Yeah, revocation of enrollment may result upon failure to verify residency, the board review, and then a sentence about board review. The administrative regulation provides for a board review, even mimicking the subtitle, whatever that's called. Working.
The board may review revocation of enrollment, the revocation of enrollment decision upon appeal by a student.
Yeah.
Specified in AR 511.
Looking at that page, the first paragraph, I was surprised that the wording is so sort of passive. Staff shall encourage parents to enroll, you know, realizing that students are required to enroll in school and except for kindergarten, but,
We're gonna change that one.
Yeah,
I
that's all
really
from the
didn't change
standard policy, you know,
well, that's what was
yeah.
there before,
Yeah.
but,
Well, that's, my guess is that's probably.
the model policy. It
Did
may
you
have
guys,
even been-
I looked up the CSBA.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys did that when you
We did, yeah. Is that, I think that might be model. I didn't notice.
No,
if it's not.
Some of it is there, but not that wording.
Okay.
The first two sentences. Well, CSBA does say encourages enrollment and appropriate placement of
Okay.
school-age children in school. But I guess it's the first sentence. The Board of Trustees believes that all children should have the opportunity to receive educational services. That just sounds kind of wishy-washy. That's not in the CSBA document. It's not only that we believe that they should have the educational opportunity, it's also required that they
Yeah.
enroll their students in school.
I mean, Sarah, would you like to get rid of the first two sentences? I'm for getting to the point. The point is, superintendent designee shall inform her and then move from there. And-
Well, the CSBA document says the governing board encourages the enrollment. So, I mean, that's a combination of those two. Maybe we should change it to be that way. The governing board or the Board of Trustees encourages, and then you skip down to the second sentence, encourages parents to enroll. And the rest of that's fine. It's that first line.
So you want to change it to the Board of Trustees encourages parents to enroll all school-age children in school.
Encourages parents to enroll all school-age children in school.
You should also probably,
Yeah.
on the next line down, the superintendent or designee shall inform parents/legal guardians, just to be consistent with our legal
Yeah.
guardians. Am I looking the rest of it?
Well, that's actually another point, Julie, that that mirrors this in the policy is we kept the statement of annual review. And that's something I think we should discuss as a board about whether that's, because we did discuss it a little bit last time. And
Right.
we didn't change that, but there was some
I mean,
recognition.
I
that
guess
that's-
my feeling was that does remain to be determined, what we want to do as a board, but we're just, I thought, we can just leave the language
Yeah.
as is,
Yeah,
and think of that as a,
yeah.
in practice, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, so on page 126, so when I was reading through our final list
Mhm.
and looking at it with the red line from the old list, and it did say grant deed to property of residence, and I thought, well, why don't we have that as the first item? Because let's say somebody just moved here,
Yeah,
they might not have a property tax bill yet. I mean, a deed might be something that they could actually produce and is, a good document, so why not have, why did we take that out? I
I think-
cannot remember.
I can't remember
I
either.
think we probably took it out because it wasn't in the ed code, 126.
What page?
So we jumped from page
126.
122 to 126.
Oh, yeah, did you have something in between?
Well, okay, so then there's the page 125.
Yeah,
So you didn't recommend any changes there?
the red lines there are pretty non-substantive, but they're,
Just some additions.
Yeah.
Just-
I wondered about
yeah.
requirement 6,
Mm-hmm.
if the student resides in a state hospital. I mean,
I think these are
is that
just-
in there by California law?
I think it's just ed code.
Oh,
Yeah.
ed code, okay.
Yeah,
That's in
Because I
there.
can't imagine we're gonna have a state hospital here anytime soon.
It's just
Okay.
following that
But
language.
let's hope they're gonna put fairs.
it's better not to change it unless there's a reason,
Yeah.
if it's a CSBA recommendation.
So my suggestion would be that we put grant deed to property of residence back in as the first item and then bump everything else out.
Should we do that? Or should we add it to the number 2 rental property agreement lease? Sort of put in the category, is it better just to have its own, because it gives more opportunity for people? We tried to
I
group,
see
I'm
what
trying to
you're
support,
saying.
we tried to group these to make a little more sense,
Mm-hmm.
but it is its own category.
Yeah, I think I would probably leave it separate.
Okay.
Now, you guys already discussed this. You guys are talking.
I'm sorry.
You guys are just sitting
Sorry.
here.
Go.
I'm trying to understand what you did with this section. And you crossed out a lot of things and then moved them down and up and,
Right, so,
maybe you can give the overview again
Sure.
for this page. This is 126.
So, we're keeping the second grant deed. Property tax payment receipts is crossed off, but really it's crossed off because it was the language that's showing the name and address of the parent legal guardian within the district, including but not limited to any. So the name and address of the parent legal guardian applies to everything.
Yeah,
So instead of it being listed as property tax
Right.
payment receipts showing name and address, that language is moving up into the
Yeah,
intro, right? And then property tax payment receipts is being moved down, rental property contract, et cetera, staying in. California driver's license is just being broadened into the government ID language of number 3. Then we added in an employment contract.
right, that's a new category we thought was
So that was
important.
a new. Then pay stub, current bank statement, the PG&E bill, we just broadened into the utility service contract category, which is the first one on the next page.
Yeah, I had questions about this number 4, the employment contract.
Mhm.
Okay.
The employment contract that includes a provision that the parent legal guardian resides at a residence in Orinda, the employer shall establish residency within the district by providing a minimum 3 of the documents contained in the list. So, I guess I was just wondering about that, because it puts it on the employer to prove that the employer is a resident. Why, just because you're using an employment contract that, I'm picturing an employment contract that just has your address on it. Why, I mean, the second sentence doesn't follow to me from the first. Why do we have an employer shall establish residency?
I wonder if that was just a typo, that the employee would bring in a contract.
No, so this
No.
is a situation
Right.
like, well, you know, what led to this review.
Right.
So you have an employee who's residing in Orinda based on the employment contract. Okay, so take the employment
Oh.
So you're sort
contract,
of
but you
piggybacking,
still,
yeah.
want to verify the residency of the employer.
Got it, okay,
Right, the reason that they're in Orinda, right? So that's just
right.
keeping the three documents requirement, but sort of shifting it to, you know, the employer who would have the proof of residency, basically.
Okay.
That was
And
the
you still
idea,
have-
that was the idea behind it.
So it gives the reviewer, in this case at that level, the superintendent, a way to verify that the person who's employing is a resident.
And the same with number 12, the caregiver affidavit, saying that, okay, that the caregiving adult still
Right.
needs to prove the same things that a parent would have to provide,
Got it,
you know, to prove residency in the district. So
right.
it's just sort of putting the same standard on that we would require from anybody. So that was the thought that was going into all that
Right.
language.
And again, we thought of trying to break these out into different categories, and there, if you've seen in other school districts, they'll have different categories. We actually went through that exercise and decided not, first because there could be legal issues with that, but second, it's more straightforward to just have one long list and let people choose from the list, as opposed to what some of the other districts do.
Like one from
If you're
column
this,
A,
if you're this type of person, go over
one
here
from
and
C,
then
yeah.
choose another from this list.
The Chinese resident.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, we're open, in fact, we started going that direction, it just seemed
Right, it
kinda,
seemed more compliant for
Right.
them to do it this way.
but that's why I'm saying that, Sarah, is you could envision a world where number 4 and number 12 are somehow separate from the others. But the approach we decided on was let's put as many as possible together.
It still seems a little odd to have that second sentence on that number 4, you know, because if you're talking about somebody who's a parent, even if they are employed in Orinda and that's part of their job to live in Orinda, and you could, it says the employer shall establish residency. I mean, you could also have a situation where somebody is, you know, hired to be watching someone's house or whatever, and the employer isn't necessarily living there right now.
Oh, that's interesting. And so you're saying, that's a
I mean,
specific
it's just,
example.
you know.
I own a house in Orinda. I actually am not domiciled there now because I had to go to London or to
Right.
Colorado, and I have
And
someone
you're
living in
under
my
someone's,
house
like,
under an
basically
employment.
Well, it
house.
might also be that, okay, so if you're living, you know, in a house in Orinda, then you just need to provide the 2 other things.
Yeah,
Your-
yeah.
Yeah, you
Your
can provide
license
other things,
with
right.
that address, or a bill with that address, or,
Yeah,
Right, and it has
That's
pay
interesting.
stub, it has all these other things, but it just seems odd to me to have that second sentence, so we can think about it.
no, that's it, and you just brought up an example where someone might not, that might not work.
Yeah,
right, well, maybe we don't need that, and we just need the 3 items from that person.
Well, an employment contract makes sense.
Right, no, keep that,
Yeah,
but
it
get rid
it
of
would
that
have the
second
person's
sentence.
name, the person who's working for someone else, it would have their name and address.
I guess, you know, when I was thinking of it, I
Yeah.
was thinking, okay, but they'll still need the other pieces, but if we're saying, okay, they can provide those other pieces, then it shouldn't shift to the employer.
Yeah, the parent themselves still has to
Yeah.
provide two other pieces, so in a
Right.
way that creates a higher burden.
Right, so
Yeah.
let's just delete, I think we
We
delete
can
that.
delete that.
The employment contract.
No, no, no,
Yeah,
the second
just the
sentence,
second
like Sarah's
sentence of the
suggesting.
employment.
The employer,
Jason and I are like, so,
Yeah, I know.
like we know every detail of it. It's like,
the second sentence.
everyone else is looking at us like,
Anyway, you want to make sure the situation is such that the employer is in Orinda. But that's verifiable just by, this wouldn't, taking out that sentence doesn't limit the ability for the superintendent or the board to verify that
employer
the house is
is in
really in Orinda,
Mhm.
and that they're resident there. Okay, let's put a sticky on that.
Jason, on that point, Jason, I don't understand what the problem is with the second sentence. What's the example where that wouldn't work?
The example is, what if you owned a house in Orinda, and you got reassigned for work to Colorado?
Yeah.
And so you decided, gee, I'm gonna have someone work in my house, basically an employment contract. You're gonna take care of the house and the pets or something. So the owner of the house is actually not currently a resident.
Okay.
They wouldn't be able to.
But it's like a house sitter, the house sitter would be
Yeah.
working for the other
I don't-
person, they live there.
Right.
I'm
It's
seeing it
just-
from a different perspective, I'm
Yeah.
saying if you're living in Orinda
Right,
at a house because you're working there,
right,
you'll still have other
yeah.
pieces, documents that show that you live there
Right.
from this list.
So why do we have to take the extra step
Right.
to ask about
Right.
the owner of the house?
Yeah, you're asking the employer to.
So you're gonna have an
That's
employment
employer
agreement,
residence.
you're gonna have a check stub, what else are you gonna have? It's not gonna be on your driver's license?
A bank statement?
In California.
I'm just worried about
A
fraud.
voter registration?
I'm worried about
Yeah, no, I
people on
agree.
Craigslist selling
Yeah, no.
residency in Orinda,
Right.
people that don't live here. So I think it is important that we,
Well, that's why I mean, that's, one of the
Yeah.
reasons when we were going through this list,
Yeah.
looking at it. I mean, the original list that we had that was just taken from the ed code, I was like, I don't know, it'd be hard for me to come up with 3 documents from this, so let's broaden it to make it easier to come up with 3 documents, but not make up 3 documents.
it makes it easier to.
You're worried that
Fraud.
someone gets, the Craigslist example is a house in Orinda, you dummy up an employment contract, and then,
I mean, up a check
Or
stub.
a rental agreement.
Mhm.
I mean, you can do that with other categories too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of why, that's why I like the Lafayette list.
But I don't think we can do the whole
yeah,
thing,
Why not?
because because council advised us not to.
not to go that route.
Why, is it more restrictive or
I
what?
think it might be overly restrictive.
Hmm.
They might need to change it.
And Aquilani's, because it's the same.
Apolloni's just has the ed code list. They might, when you go there, their policy does not have the.
But you enroll your student has that exact same box, and you got it from 2 columns.
That's true, and I don't know if they might be able to do that, I don't know. They're doing 2 documents.
2 from each side of the list.
Apolloni's?
No, it's
I
like
have that.
3, isn't it?
Their list
Yeah,
is
it's
just
3,
the ed
you
code.
have to plan with 3.
Their list doesn't say that.
It's your-
It's when you bring, when they tell you what you need to bring, or count.
Yeah, the doc,
Yeah.
it's the
Okay,
ID
it's not on
and
the,
then
yeah,
2
okay, so.
other-
Well, and now, I think the reality is that if you're going, even under the
Yeah.
old system,
Mhm.
you could have people making up documents, right? I don't know that we could prevent that completely. I guess the whole point of
Yeah.
residency verification is that you try to catch that, but you're not gonna be, we're trying not to open the door for that, but we're trying to, make it manageable for people, I guess.
Yeah, and the reason why I think we have to consider it is that, which I hadn't thought of, the way it's drafted, it's a double requirement. Because you got the parent doing 2 others and this. and then the owner also doing 3.
Well, maybe you have to have the owner verify
Just,
somehow.
right, I was thinking just a more straightforward sentence, the employer shall establish residency in the district, or shall be, you know. That ruins the Colorado example, because there might be an employer who doesn't.
Right,
I think we should
maybe
think about
just
it.
keep that
Yeah,
first
I think we
clause
should
and
think
get
about
rid,
it.
and have it end within the district.
I think that's better.
Yeah.
And that addresses the Craigslist issue.
Because the Craigslist thing was actually a rental
Well, yeah.
agreement. It
Yeah.
wasn't an employment contract, it was,
Well,
Let's keep
it's
one
not
of
that
these.
situation, he's thinking of another
Yeah.
situation that someone would try to, just like a rental agreement put together an employment contract.
okay.
Should we do the same on the caregiver?
Number 12?
Yeah,
No, I don't think so, because
Do
that's
the same
different.
That is different.
That's,
Yeah, it's in
the
accordance with the family
caregiver
code.
is,
Yeah.
right, has
Yeah.
to establish residency,
Yeah.
so I think you leave that.
okay.
One thing I was wondering that we had taken out is on page 127, line 24, the district reserves the right to request any additional proof of residency as necessary. So we have that
Yeah,
under
later on,
our
we,
failure to verify residency section, but
Yeah.
then what, I can't remember why we took it out there, and maybe we want to keep it back over there.
I kinda liked it, but yeah, I don't know why we ended up moving, because we moved a lot of things. I agree with
Right.
that.
I'm not
It seems like that's a more logical place, so everyone, that's line 24 on 127, there's a line that says district reserves the right. We have it under failure to verify residency, because we wanted to have a separate section that talks about what happens when you fail.
Yeah.
But this isn't about failure, this is about getting it in the first place.
So let's move it back over
Yeah.
to there, or keep it there and in the other
You could keep it,
section?
yeah.
Right.
Okay, and then, sorry, did you look at
That's a good point, Sarah.
Well, I can't remember where it is, but there's some place where it says you have to annually,
it?
show,
Yeah,
where is that?
It's on the beginning, page 126 at the top.
yeah.
Because, it says that now, but we don't actually do that now. And somebody said to me that I heard from someone, I can't remember who, that they felt that it was against ed code or something. I don't know, did you guys hear anything about that from the attorney, whether that's typical or not, to have that annually verified?
I have not heard anything about that being against ed code.
No, we brought up the topic
Mhm.
just when we were discussing, but we didn't ask for an analysis, so I don't.
Mhm.
I think that we have an issue of, we should do what we say.
Right, we have an enforcement issue, but
Right.
that's separate from the language.
Well, so the question is, do we really want to do annually verify? Because we don't do that now. They do it at Aqualines, but we don't do it now at Orinda. And if we do it, that's a lot more work for everyone. And maybe we should, but we should talk about it. And also, I just noticed that you crossed out at the end, it says 5 CCR 432. I'm not sure why it's crossed out.
It's just for, just to make it look like our other policies and regs, because we typically put things at the bottom under the legal references, so there were a couple of places.
We tried to remove all the legal references from the top and leave them at the bottom, because that means they can be updated more easily. So we did that a few places.
I actually find it helpful to have it in the text, because it pertains to that section. So I was just surprised at that. I don't see why we need to cross them out, because
I think it was just trying to be consistent with the other policies in the district.
well, seems like there's a lot of them that do have those in, maybe not.
Well, they do this thing. can't
So
say
they
it's
have
complete.
it at the end of the year.
Yeah, it's
We
all,
haven't looked at all
let's
of
be
them.
honest, it's all over the map, so,
Yeah.
it's,
Well, the point is, it's supposed to help you to, you know, refer to the policy for that section, and this is a long document, so I think it helps to have it near the section rather than at the very end. So I prefer it being left in myself, or else just put at the end of the paragraph.
what do we think about the annual?
The annual thing,
So I mean, we did talk about this last month.
Right.
We've got students in the district who residency wasn't verified, was only verified when they entered the district, whether that's kindergarten or when they came in,
Yep.
have moved out of the district and are still attending our schools. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a problem. There are people that aren't paying taxes in Orinda. We aren't. So I think, I thought we kind of had some consensus last month that we were gonna direct staff, but we did want this annually verified.
I've been to a couple of site council meetings and parent clubs, and the principals were horrified to think that they might have to verify residents annually, and they said, well, the problem is, I said, well, they do it at Miramani, why shouldn't you do it? And they said, well, because Miramani has a huge staff in the front office, and the principals will say, I've got one person. So every year, when hordes of kids come in, parents come in, that person is a real problem.
Yeah. I mean, Miramani has 2 people there.
But they also have student people behind the counter who can be answering the phones while the 2 people are doing the residence. I'm just passing on what I
No,
heard.
it's a burden, but I think it's a necessary burden. And I've heard complaints from parents that aren't happy that they've got kids in their schools where their parents don't live in the district.
well, it is putting a lot of work on our office though. So I'm curious, what do they do in Lafayette, Moronga, other surrounding districts on this, you know, their elementary districts? Does anyone know?
Joe, do you have any? Yeah.
Well, I think we
I
should
mean,
find
our
out.
policy right now is that my junior son is the only time I provided proof of residency, and I still have a 3rd grader. You know, so I provided information 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I could be living anywhere. You know, except for the fact that I have to provide it to Miramani every week. So, you know, I agree it's a bigger burden. I would like to get maybe a little more information on how big a burden it actually is. I think it's from the staff, school site staff, it could be just collecting the documentation. I'm just wondering what happens to it after it's collected. If it's just having a bunch of parents hand in, more parents than usual handing in documents, and then, you know, with their other registration forms, and you know, clipping them together and then handing it to someone at the district to look at, that's not a huge burden.
Well, if you remember how they do it at the high school district, they look at your document while you're there, they check a box, once the 3 boxes are checked, they sign it, hand you back your card. And
Right, but
then
they also-
another copy of the card's attached to the documents they're putting in the file.
They also do that in August before school starts, and they're open because of sports. So the other question I would have is, you know, I don't think our school offices are open in August the same way that high school is. And so then we have to be doing it at the beginning of school, which is a heck of time. I mean, I just think it wouldn't hurt to have, you know, some better idea of, if we do this, how is it actually going to be implemented?
I agree,
Is it a
100%.
burden?
Yeah, so I'll make sure
You're
that
right, maybe it's at the
we,
possible socials or whatever.
I'll make sure we ask staff to get us that information.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Joe, what does that look like?
We already did ask them, and they said we'd have to add additional staff at the beginning of school.
But we'd also like to know what other districts, how other districts are handling it, how Lafayette and Montgomery are handling it.
Yeah, I don't know that they are.
And maybe if there's an alternative, you know, let's ask staff, is there creative? I
Lafayette's
think,
policy says
They're
that it
opening
does
the
it
school.
like
Yeah.
In the first,
K3 and
in those days,
7.
we have to add people in there to be able to process all of that extra period of, a week or so beforehand. That's what the principals indicated.
So
Regardless of what the
an
other
extra
districts
person at each,
Well, yeah, extra time for a person to do that in the open, prior to school.
Well, after the Miramonte, staff people stamp it and give it back to you, what happens to it then? Somebody review it, does it go to the district office and get reviewed?
I think it's
Find
done
out?
at that point,
It is
Done.
unverified.
students enrolled.
So you could have a staff person at like a popsicle social, just at a table, just getting the residency verification stuff.
I think it should be done across the counter at the school center.
Yeah. It should be done.
That's what we'll find out.
But
The
I'd like to,
administrators already said that's what they would need prior to the opening of school, they need extra staff to be able to review the documents and check them off.
and did the administrators say they felt that was too much?
Well, we didn't,
You didn't ask them a subjective
we've
opinion.
asked that question before.
Right.
And some felt it was too much, and others felt they wanted it, but we asked what would it take to do this
Got it.
now, and they said that's what they would need.
Well, another thought is if we didn't do it every year, what about doing it every other year, or is that too confusing to be beneficial? But it would be half as many kids that you'd be doing.
Half the alphabet one year, half another. I think there's consensus, I think one point we have consensus on is that it should not be that you do it once and come in the school district and then you can go all the way through. That isn't what we say, and that just doesn't seem prudent at all. So is there a medium somewhere to where we feel like we have an effective enforcement?
You could do
Not
different
every year.
grades. You could
Right.
do
We
different,
could
you
do
know,
middle
every
school,
other.
sixth grade, elementary school.
You
For
could
sure.
do, we've talked about doing it at middle school.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, you know, the middle school actually wanted to do it prior to entry of middle school.
Really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
So that's one option if you want to start it at the middle school level. Or you could do it at the, you know, at the, intermediate, elementary grade
Yeah,
at some point.
third
The
grade or
elementary
something.
grades and middle school. So
K, 3, and 6 or
I
something.
think
Yeah.
Lafayette is
K
like
through
K
six.
3-7 or K 3-6 and any new.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Why don't we
Well,
have
we
those
should-
two
we
as
should
options?
verify
we
that.
can-
yeah. Verify what does Lafayette and Moraga do.
Lafayette's is in their policy, Rhonda, I have no idea.
We have something in our policy that we weren't doing.
Well, that's
Yeah.
Just
true.
because it's in their
Yeah,
policy.
Lafayette's is a step down
Very good point.
from our policy.
And I don't want our policy to say we're gonna annually verify if we are.
Absolutely not. I want this to reflect what we're gonna do, which is why we should get serious buy-in that we can do it.
Great.
So
Okay.
do you have a
Okay.
do you have agreement on the levels, or did you want to think about that? some
No,
more?
what we'd like is for you to contact Moraga and Lafayette, see what they are doing. Are they annually verifying, are they only annually verifying K 3 and 6 plus new students, how are they?
Whatever we come up with, and how will that affect what you want to do? Do you want to wait and hear that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Decide?
information will then guide our discussion moving forward. Is that fair? Okay.
I have another topic to talk about. On page 128, are we there yet?
Yeah, no, I think here we get to it. Can we do it in order though?
Sure.
Um,
That's first.
Just wanna make sure above, let's finish up this alternative living arrangements.
What page is that?
It's right above that.
Oh,
So, on
128.
128, our recommendation is to get rid of that. We find no basis in law for it, and we think that
What
by,
line are you on?
I'm sorry, line
6
6
through
through
11.
11 was something in our policy we didn't find in any other.
Oh, so
And we
I
don't know
thought
what the
that
term
had to
means.
do with the law that you know, that you have to accommodate if there's a child who's homeless or something like that. There's some
Well, we
law.
have
That's
it
later.
separate
It might
homeless.
have been a
But I
vestige of
think
that,
that's why it is in there.
but then we have a whole section on that
Right,
on page 130.
so we already have that. Line 6 through the end of the page.
What this felt like was a relief valve that was put in there at some point saying, hey, if you can't do the other stuff, you can do this. And so what we tried to do instead is say, well, since we don't know what triggers the relief valve of alternative living arrangements, let's try to make the categories work. So there's really nothing in here. We put the declaration of residency over in the original list. Grant deed and property tax, well, that's already over there. So then there's this line, at minimum alternative living arrangements must be verified annually. Joe, how would you do that? How would you verify someone's alternative living arrangement?
Well, the set you described, that allows us, the opportunity to take into account other arrangements and look at it, and it depends on what the arrangement. So that allows for unique situations that we may not have thought of.
Mhm.
Yeah, did you bring that up with the attorney? 'Cause
Yeah, I think the council had recommended that we leave that in there to provide what you just described, an escape valve or something that we haven't thought
It just seemed really unclear.
I would
What
rather
it
just,
was
I would,
saying.
if we need a relief valve, I hear what you're saying, Joe, if we need a relief valve, I'd rather just say that
Keep it in
outright.
there, even, not keep it in
Say
there.
what outside?
Don't call it alternative living arrangements. A relief valve is if for some reason a parent is unable to provide these three things,
It's already
Then-
in there, isn't it? They
Yeah,
can sign
but
an
that is-
affidavit.
yeah, exactly, the affidavit's already there.
I think this is sort of the thought process we were going through.
Yeah, yeah.
In
You're right.
deciding why do we need that language in there, what is it adding, it doesn't seem,
Well, if you remember, you had that conversation with him, and he said we had to put that in there as a recommendation,
I mean, I don't have a problem with leaving it in there, I just don't really understand what it means.
Yeah.
Well, we can get,
Clear.
we can ask him to clarify examples if you want that. I mean, we didn't drill down any farther. than that.
So basically what it does is if we can do something that doesn't use the terminology, or if we use it, feel like we have to define it, if you leave in a relief valve, you're basically saying the superintendent should have the flexibility to make an exception to the three check off if there's a declaration of residency,
And an alternative, if there's some other arrangement living wise, yeah.
and maybe
Yeah, sometimes you get,
I'm uncomfortable with that whole section. I mean,
yeah.
if they can't provide a driver's license with an address, a tax return, and a utility bill, and then we're saying,
Yeah.
but provide us a grant deed to your property. I
Right.
mean, doesn't make sense. I mean, a person who's unable to provide all the rest of that stuff isn't gonna have a grant deed or be paying property tax.
Yeah, and this was asking for all three of those items. That's why
Yeah.
we couldn't figure, I get the purpose, Joe.
Vivian's mom
Yeah,
can't provide that
Right.
kind of
I think
evidence.
we have to ask.
But the homeowner could, that's the flexibility, but we already have declaration of residency as a
Right.
separate
Right.
item in our list. We have the grant deed or property tax bill.
We're talking about the alternative living arrangements.
yeah,
So we've got this CSBA thing here, and
Yeah.
it's got this thing, note, federal and state laws require the immediate enrollment of homeless youth and foster youth.
Separate section.
yeah.
Well, it's written in this place in their policy,
We
right
have a
about
whole
failure.
section on homeless and foster youth.
No, it's a good point,
So,
but we
are
do
you
it
saying, where is it? Are you saying it's already?
130.
I'm not that I think we
No, no,
have that being homeless youth in Orinda, I'm just saying, I think that's why it's in here. So you say page 130, residency for homeless youth.
And in fact, we had entertained making that a shorter section because we felt like it wasn't something that pertained, but council advised, nope, get everything that's in the statute there, and I think that's why.
Well, fine, whatever, I mean, if it's covered, then fine, but that, to me, is a legal thing, and we should double check with our attorney. If we're gonna take it out.
Okay, well, so I think that we have our third item that we want to, well, direction from the board. Is it,
Third item, which third item?
well, we've identified two things we want to do follow-up on, the annual and whether we require the
Mhm,
owner to have any verification.
mhm.
Do we want to, visit this section again, to come back?
We're talking about alternative living arrangements,
Yes,
and it's the recommendation of legal counsel that we keep it in,
yes.
then I definitely think we should revisit it.
okay. We'll try to come back with something without the term alternative living arrangements that gives a relief valve. Or if for some reason that term is there, I just feel like we have to define it more.
Well, I think that's what legal counsel can help you do.
I hate that term, it seems judgmental.
I don't like it.
I mean, it really seems judgmental to me.
What do you mean judgmental?
Sounds like something someone would have written in the 1940s about
Yeah,
who are different.
like,
Yeah.
oh, you're not married.
I
That's,
don't
Yeah,
know,
you're
that's what I'm
alternative.
saying, I don't even know what it means,
Hey,
that's why I'm
in the modern world, I
asking.
don't,
Like,
yeah.
what does it, what
But
does it
enough
mean?
said about that, okay, we, message
Okay.
heard, since
Next
council
on my
feels
So
list.
you'll check on that.
Yep.
So, then I was gonna bring
Yep.
up something toward the bottom of the page. Toward the bottom of the page, we have this section, failure to verify residency, in the first paragraph. It talks about if there's if a district employee reasonably believes that the parent, guardian of the student has provided false or unreliable evidence, the superintendent shall make reasonable efforts to determine the student meets district residency requirements.
Can I pause there just for a second, just for context? That was the old statement from the old policy that we moved to a new section. So far, that statement's the old statement from the old
It was on a
policy.
different page and you
Yeah,
moved it over.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
But then the next paragraph was something we added that's completely new to try to explain it more, and that's open to discussion, whether it helps or hurts.
Okay. So the next paragraph, reason to believe that a student has provided false or unreliable evidence of residency. Well, the first thing is, it's usually the parent who's providing the evidence, not the student. But,
That's a good point. Yeah.
well, we've used student throughout, so if we change it here, we should
Yeah.
change it every place else.
Yeah.
Well, the paragraph above, it talks about the parent / guardian of a student.
That's provided.
I don't know, we just, anyway, my point is that, it goes on about unreliable evidence of residency includes without limitation and solely as illustrative examples. And then it gives examples, and then it says the district reserves the right to request additional proofs of residency as necessary. Reasonable efforts include but are not limited to unannounced home visitations and use of licensed private investigators. By the time you get to the end, I'm thinking to myself, and to spare ourselves a repeat of what we've already gone through,
Mhm.
as a board member, I would like to be notified if we are to the extent where we're hiring a private investigator. And I don't know whether, whether it's appropriate to actually put that in the policy, but if we don't, how, what are the steps that we're gonna do and how we as board members aware of issues or not. So I think that's a really important point we should discuss. And also, there's a lot of gray area here in reasonable efforts and reasonable, if a district employee reasonably believes. So, I don't know, you guys made this recommendation, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'll make a first stab. That I agree, and at the last meeting we discussed that our current policy, which is a reflection of other policies, this first paragraph, is vague, leaves room, leaves a lot of room. What is reasonably leaves and what is reasonable efforts? So the paragraph here tries to give examples so that the board is giving guidance to staff of what the type of things that are appropriate and not appropriate, which is why we have objective evidence there. There are a lot of reasons that are not appropriate to reasonably believe, the way someone looks or, whatever. It's not a reasonable belief to think someone doesn't live there. So the attempt is to try to, and then of course the lawyers tell us, be sure to say it's only illustrations and, without limitations so that you're not limiting the examples for things you can't think about. But those are the examples we came up with. So that's trying to address reasonably believes, because it's an observer who reasonably believes, either staff or someone who reports to staff. And then the second part is what's appropriate inquiry. The old policy didn't say what was or wasn't. So we've stated what has been the policy of what is appropriate or not. So that's the purpose of it. And then your third point is, okay, when you do that, should there be some additional notice to the board? In this draft, we have the notice to the board added later. The old policy had no notice to the board at sort of any time. We triggered the notice to the board after the full investigation, there being a right for it to come right to the board really quickly. Because we felt that if you had notice in the middle of an investigation, that puts the board in the middle of the process, and if the board is an appeal body, what should happen is the process should run its course. The student doesn't get expelled, runs its course, and then the parent can say, hey, I still don't think that's right. I'm going to put more evidence in the record, and I want the board to hear this. So that's, we chose not to do it then, but to do it later. That's, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just explaining that's the way this is laid out. Is that fair?
I completely understand that, and that's fine. I would like to see some prioritizing. In other words, you've had, let's say, inconsistent statements about residency. I'd like to see us do it the same all the time, and the first thing we do is have an unannounced visit at home. In other words, don't just jump to a private investigator. Do a couple of visits over a period of time, not just one. You know, it's sort of like a physician doing the least invasive and least expensive procedures.
So you're saying establish a process.
Right.
I would think that the district would already have a process that maybe just isn't in here, but I'm not sure. Joe, is there a process that
We
you?
don't have staff to do that type of activity, and most staff are reluctant to do that type of thing.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? The unannounced home visits is a terminology used in all these things, but the reality is we don't have either staff to do it or someone who's trained in the way to do it.
There are some situations that we have encountered where there are safety issues for people doing that type of thing.
It puts staff in an awkward position.
So we don't have people.
And I think the idea behind the regulation is to maintain the flexibility to
Right.
do what's appropriate for a particular situation.
I just don't like to see us jump right to a private investigator. Why can't we call the home then? I mean, I understand, we don't want to put the staff at risk, but, you know, it's, as a matter of time, Ed's out running around throughout the district a lot during the day, isn't he?
Not necessarily.
But that's not his job.
That's not his job.
I
Director of
understand that,
facilities.
but, so then why even have announced home visits in there? Why
No,
don't we
that's
just-
actually a good question, because I'm not sure we're equipped right now to do them.
Yeah,
Well,
so
by-
why don't we
by
just
private
say, we're,
investigator.
You could have.
Well,
a
yes, it
private
would be by a
investigator.
private investigator, by someone hired.
But you make a good point, Carol. Where's the calling the home and, you know, on several occasions or, you know,
Okay.
Again, I think we
those.
want to leave the flexibility, I mean, this is why maybe you don't have any of this language in there, because once you start identifying things, you start taking away
Yeah.
Right.
flexibility.
That is the flip side, that rather than doing this, we did this because we wanted to have the conversation about it, but rather than do this, you could say that superintendent has to have protocol of some sort that is shared with the board, giving that flexibility to the superintendent.
Well, you could just say, you could delete that whole paragraph.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And just say, you know, the superintendent shall make reasonable efforts, period. And you don't have to define it, it's just, I mean, the point of defining it was to give notice again of some of the reasons or some of the efforts that might be taken to give notice to the community, so that's.
but it sounds like we're not even pretending, we don't do unannounced home visits. So that
No,
would
that's
have that sentence,
Well,
Read.
but you could,
Reasonable
but it might
efforts.
not be by a staff person, is what I'm hearing, right?
so we would have a private investigator visit the home first.
Well, I think some districts do have unannounced. I don't know, I mean, I
No, they do,
talked
they have
to
personnel.
a
that do
couple
that.
of people in other districts, and they said, well, they're a bigger district, but they just have someone from their staff go to the home, knock on the door. I mean, you know.
That's what
so-
they do,
Yeah.
that's their job.
It can be done, but, yeah, it is a question whether we put it in here or not. But my point is, you know, yeah, if you take it out again, then isn't that similar to what we have now? And, you know, we obviously ran into problems with this policy already, and, if we don't spell out a process, you know, I like what Carol was saying about having a process, then we all know that a process will be followed. That makes more sense to me, and I also would, as a board member, I would rather be notified, even just that there's, you know, a process going on, even if I'm not told, you know, the name of the student, even what school, just that there's an issue we're working on. I would rather know that than that find out we've hired a private investigator and.
Well,
you
couldn't
know.
that be something that's more appropriate for like a governance handbook or something and not necessarily have to be put into a policy?
It could be, but we're discussing this policy.
I know, but I'm just, that's my.
So you're
Governance
proposing
hand-
that,
It's not really a governance handbook, but it could come up in
Well,
that
it's sort of like
discussion as well.
notification to the board, that kind of issue, I could see, not necessarily being in this, but being in sort of a handbook, you know, like just the way that we as a board want to be notified on the work. Could be
Well,
something that
but
we
it's
can discuss
specific
in
to this
governance.
topic, it's specific to this topic, not just in general.
I know, but there are